a place that knows you as God. Welcome to a place that sees who you are. We are of one mind, we are of one heart. Welcome to a place that knows the truth that God is everything. God is me, God is you.
Sunday school teacher is teaching a class of 5 and 6-year-olds 10 commandments. He's talking on the one about honoring thy father and mother. And then it turns to the kids and goes, so what do you think is a commandment about how you treat your brother and sister? And one kid shouts out, thou shalt not kill. The consciousness of racism. Ugh. Tough topic. Well, the consciousness of racism is fear. What we need is love. Thank you very much. Good day. If it was only that simple, if we could just turn off our fear and turn on our love, and that was that, and we were like that, boom. If it was only that simple. Unarmed black man gets shot this past Thursday in New York City. For that, unarmed black man gets killed in his grandma's backyard, shot 6 times in the back. About a month before that, unarmed black man gets shot down in Texas. Now, while this is going on, because racism is not just an American thing, 7 unarmed Palestinians are killed demonstrating at the Gaza Strip by Israelis. Taliban blows up a school, killing girls because they believe that girls don't deserve an education and should die if they try to get one. Whew. That's a lot of fear going on in the world. I'll tell you. And so I wanted to talk about this because it was present for me, particularly after I saw a video on Facebook of parents speaking about the conversation they have to have with their sons that they are not safe in their own country. When I was a kid, I knew about that conversation. I had black friends, and their parents gave those kids that conversation. But when I knew when I heard that was still going on today, I cried. And yet, what we teach here is there are no victims. There are no victims. And yet, there's all this stuff going on. Now, white privilege is something I have taken advantage of for a huge part of my life. One of the biggest moments I remember was when I was in my 20s. At the time, I was actually homeless. Been living on the streets for about 3-4 days. It was pouring rain. I was filthy. And my mom finally said, why don't you come to my apartment, take a shower, sleep on the couch for a couple days, pull yourself together. And I had enough cash to get into a cab, so I went out. This is in New York City. I went out, started hailing a cab, and I watched this cab pass by this incredibly well-dressed black man and picked me up, a street person. White privilege. I got in that cab, and I asked him, I said, why did you pass him up and pick me up? He says, because you remind me of my kid. But that wasn't why he picked me up. So I have had the experience throughout my life of having the advantage of being white, straight, and male. It has made my life dramatically easier than pretty much, as far as I know, every other race every other race and between women and males, whatever that word is called, gender, thank you. Every other race and gender on the planet, I have had it the easiest. Now, have I had it easy? No, but easier? Absolutely. I've had advantages, been able to step up. So who am I to speak about racism and blacks' disadvantage, being this guy who's had all the advantages? Well, just happen to be the guy who's really bugged by the whole thing and knows that science of mind has a place in all this. It must. Otherwise, what good is it? So I go back to our basic principles. The first, what we focus on, we give power to. What we focus on, we give power to. Racism isn't just in the oppressor. Racism is in the oppressed. Both are playing this game of feeding something that at least one side doesn't want, even though the other side does. Buckminster Fuller has this great quote. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. I mean, that's really what we want to do, right? We want to make racism obsolete. Can't do that if we continually try to fight racism, because then we're focusing on what it is we don't want. We need a new paradigm. We need a new vision here. Well, there are some people out there who actually already know that. Black Lives Matters. I love that movement. One of the leaders of Black Lives Matters got up and said this, especially when there were all these white supremacists who had to stand up and go, well, wait a minute, white lives matter too. Yeah, like we didn't already know that. They stood up, she said, this isn't about that white lives or Hispanic lives or any other lives don't matter. This is about the positive vision that black lives do. Because we need a positive vision, because a lot of us who are black experience not feeling that it can matter. And I just think that's it, Then we're feeding something that actually is worth feeding, right? That positive new vision. They're not fighting racism. They're simply standing for that Black Lives Matter. Just the way each of us, what we teach here is that each of our lives matter. They're not doing anything different than we do here every week and every day in our lives, looking at how our lives matter. So it's beautiful. But then I heard some other folks on NPR the other day say some things that actually was rather disturbing to me in terms of the lack of progress. And so you know how I love stats, right? I have some stats for you. Okay. So it turns out that in 2014, after a teenager, black unarmed teenager, was killed in his home, people started asking, what are the stats on this? And it turned out that nobody was keeping any. No one was keeping stats on unarmed anybody, whether they be black, Hispanic, white, whatever, being killed by police. This thing is ringing, so you might want to, that means that you need to mute some other things. Okay. So they all looked at each other, all the different agencies looked at each other and said, who's going to keep these stats? And nobody stepped up to do that except the Washington Post. So in 2014, the Washington Post says, we're going to keep those stats. From now on, we're going to keep stats on how many unarmed killings there are by police. And so, since then, here are the stats. In the first year they kept the stats, 96 94 people were killed who were unarmed by police. Out of those, let's make sure I got my numbers right here, 19 of those were black. The following year, that stat dropped to 51 being killed totally, but it only dropped to 17 from 19 for unarmed blacks. In 2017, the numbers didn't change hardly at all. But what's interesting was that change in that first year. And I'll tell you why that's interesting. Because another precept of our movement is that awareness makes change. Awareness alone changes something. You know, something they've known in the dietary world for ages is that if you write down what you eat every day, every time you eat, you will change your diet. And you will get healthier simply by writing it down, that the awareness itself creates change. And so that's what happened here. We had a moment where awareness itself began to create change. That's a good thing. Now, here's the thing about unarmed shootings. Those numbers I gave you, of even at their worst 94, are based on 1.5 million altercations that police deal with a year. So I know that there's a lot of upset when an unarmed person gets killed, but from a percentage basis, we are doing better. I mean, that's a pretty low percentage compared to 1.5 million violent altercations a year that police confront. Even in the first year, 94 got shot. I didn't do my math. I should have before I got here, but that's a pretty low percentage, you know? And so why do I bring that up? Am I trying to somehow say that, you know, there isn't an issue here that needs dealing with? No, I'm not trying to say that at all. But I am saying that in our movement, we believe in an inner GPS that guides us forward. And if you're in New York, if you're in New York and wanting to get to California, and you've driven all the way to Tennessee, but you still think you're in New York, how's it going? You got to know how you're moving along. You have to be willing to see the change, because it is actually again, going back to what we focus on, we give power to. If we don't see the changes that are happening, we're actually feeding the power to there is no change. So if we want to see change, we need to recognize the change that occurs. Now, Tennessee is not California. If you're trying to get to California and you've made it to Tennessee, you still got a ways to go, yes? Like, 1,500 miles or more, yeah. So I'm not saying we're there, but I'm saying we're not in New York anymore either. There are changes that are occurring, and it is our knowing of what changes have occurred that we know. Like, if you know you're in Tennessee, you know your next step is whatever state comes next. And if you have a GPS, it'll be able to tell you. But if you're in Tennessee, the next place you want to go to isn't Ohio. That would be backwards, even though it's further west than New York, which is where you started. So you got to know where you are to know what your next steps are, to know what you're going to do, because what we teach here is that knowing the truth, knowing your higher self, knowing what is yours to do is how we take those kinds of next steps. So what is it I'm trying to say today? With all these both sides going, I'm saying that there is a way in which it is up to each of us to grow our awareness. I got a new car yesterday. Now, back in November, my car that I had crossed 300,000 miles. And that was my goal. to have a car make it 300,000 miles. So I did it. So it did it, and then I noticed that what I really want this time is a little Fiat electric car. That's the one I wanted. So I started going and checking them out, and the truth was is they were more expensive than, I wanted to pay. But the funny thing is I started the process moving, and I'm really good at manifesting stuff. So so I did a couple of things. I kept envisioning myself in a Fiat, an electric Fiat. I kept in touch with all the dealerships in terms of the deals and prices and all this stuff that was going on. So I took some action and just rested with perfect, Ash and I were talking about perfect and right time. And then yesterday, I get a call from a dealer about a returned leased car that had 10,000 miles on it that they were offering at a ridiculously low price, and they didn't even put it out for display because the guy remembered me. So if I wanted to shoot over there, I could probably get it before it even got on the market. So I shot over there, and we haggled, and we did all the things you do with car dealers, and then I drove it out of the lot at the end of the day. Now, why am I bringing that up now when I'm talking about racism? Because all that time I'm visualizing on my car, I'm not visualizing about a world that works for everyone. I started thinking this morning how often I spent so much time visualizing myself in that car. Have I spent that kind of time visualizing a world that works for everyone? A world without racism? A world where we treat each other with respect? No. I spent that time on my car, or I spend that time about this center growing, or I spend that time about getting my bills paid, or whatever else, or my health, or whatever. How much time? If I'm really good at creating what I put my attention to, because that's what I give power to. That's what you are giving power to. So what I want to inspire you today is to spend more time thinking about the world at large, and it's thinking about a world that works for everyone and what that looks like to you, because just thinking about it isn't enough. You got to visualize it, and through visualizing it, your inner higher self will finally give you your next step to take. Because that's where the power is. We start out, right, by just thinking about something like I did, I want this Fiat, right? And at first, it felt out of reach. Now I'm talking about a stupid car, and when the real subject is racism. So I want to be clear, I'm not comparing the two. What I am comparing is the process. Because the process is the same, whether it's racism, whether it's people being killed, whether it's high schoolers getting killed, whatever it is, the process is the same, because what we believe is always the same, and that there are no victims, and it is up to us to empower ourselves, and then to hold the world as empowered. But to do that takes actual time. Time you might be spending worrying about paying your next bill. And you might be saying, well, I got to take care of myself first. Well, that's what everybody else is doing too. Racism couldn't exist if people weren't around going, I got to take care of myself first. Racism exists because of that. In fact, that's what racists count on. They count on people worrying about taking care of themselves first. We are all in this together. We are all in this together. When I was a kid, we had a black and white TV set. That's what I grew up with. And every year, we watched The Wizard of Oz. Every single year. And so, it's a good movie, and now I'm 18 and away at college, and some of the college kids say, hey, down in San Francisco, which wasn't far from where I was going to school, they're showing The Wizard of Oz on the big screen. Do you want to go? And I'm like, yeah, I'd love to see that. I saw it every year on this tiny little TV set. It'd be really fun to see it on the big screen. So we go down and we go watch it on the big screen, and it starts out in black and white, just the way I remember it. And then all of a sudden, Dorothy lands in Oz, the doors open, and it's in color. I had no idea. I crack up laughing. I'm sitting there, I am out of control, laughing so hard. These kids I'm with, they have no clue what I'm laughing at. And then it gets to the part of where the guy says, well, that's a horse of a different color. And it actually changes color. I didn't know that. You don't see that on a black and white screen. It was unbelievable. What an eye-opening experience. That's what it's like when we get to a new paradigm. That's what it's like when something new arises that we never saw before. Einstein says you cannot fix a problem with the same thinking that created the problem. What we need to do is find something new here. And that only happens if we give it time and thought. That only happens if when something goes on, God, I remember this scene, if I had said, no, I'm not getting in that cab. You don't get to just pass by somebody and then me take it. I didn't do that then. I would do that now. We need to stand up for one another. Because our good, our true good, is when we were all in it together. Because we are anyway. Every time we're at odds and fighting, we are hurting all of us. So this is our chance. We have a teaching here that is so relevant to what is going on in the world. Our teaching is so relevant to what's going on in the world. We have a teaching here that can raise up if we're willing to truly live by it every moment of the day. I mentioned Gandhi a moment before, and that's because I remember this scene from the movie, and I don't know if it happened to him in real life, but I love this scene in the movie where he's on the sidewalk in South Africa, and he's walking down the sidewalk. And at that time, Indians were not allowed to walk on the sidewalk. And there's a bunch of white bullies, kids, heading towards them. And the man who's with Gandhi says, maybe we should get off the sidewalk. And Gandhi says, no, sometimes you just got to stand in your truth and take what comes. And you could tell he was scared. He didn't say that like, being flippant about it. But he never raised a hand to anybody. He took a bunch of punches and he changed the world. And that's what's possible for any one of us. But we got to stand by these principles fully, not just for ourselves, not just for the parking space or the car or the house or the job or the relationship, but a world that works for everyone. That's what's possible here. So I'm going to end with a quote by Dr. Martin Luther King. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. When we allow freedom to ring, when we let it ring from every city and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we'll be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men, white men, Jews, Gentiles, Protestants, and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Great God Almighty, we are free at last. Thank you. All right, take out what you're going to give. Hold it in your hand. This is how we create. The law of circulation, this is how we create our own abundance. This is how we give to life so that it gives back to us. You don't want it crumpled up. You want to straighten it out. Hold it in your hand knowing this is power. This is presence. This goes forth in a world that works for everyone. And so let's say our affirmation together. God is the source of all supply. Money is God in action. What we give, we receive multiplied abundantly. All that God is, I am.
You are the face of God. I hold you in my heart. You are a part of me. You are the face of God. You are the face of God.